Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burton. I have a PhD in mathematics, and I want to talk about counting greenhouse gas emissions from Seattle's cruise ships. I understand that the port is not required to report emissions for ships once they leave our local airshed. But I do not understand how commissioners can make responsible decisions about cruise, whether to increase it or decrease it, without knowing its total climate impact. I have calculated cruise emissions for the entire journey to Alaska and back using ship call records from the port's 2019 season and an online carbon calculator supported by respectable sources. My total estimate was about 1.1 million tons for the whole journey. This is about 20 times larger than the port's estimate of 59,000 tons for the emissions just in our local airshed. These two numbers are actually consistent. Our airshed corresponds to about 5% of the total distance traveled by the ships, and your number is about 5% of my number. What this means is that you're making decisions about cruise while ignoring 95% of its contribution to the climate crisis. It also means that you are wildly overestimating how much shore power can reduce ships' contribution to climate change. Your website says that about 25% of a cruise ship's total emissions in Puget Sound can be avoided by plugging into shore power. This 25% reduction within Puget Sound translates into only a 1.25% reduction when the whole journey is considered. The climate doesn't care what numbers show up in your report. The climate responds to what goes into the atmosphere. I'd like to respectfully remind you that you work for the public. You don't work for the cruise companies, and you don't work for the travel industry. If the activities you promote result in great public harm, you need to be aware of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Burton. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Jordan Van Bost. For 2.5 years, Seattle Cruise Control has been amplifying voices from client scientists, the IPCC, and frontline communities, but business as usual is still the norm. This commission continues to promote and fund cruise tourism despite statements to the contrary. Many years ago, I left my job in corporate America to live on a small island. I was searching for answers because I knew modern global culture was dangerously out of balance. Native people from many different tribes speak about prophecy that unless we learn to live in harmony with natural laws and within ecological limits, we will destroy this world. Are we heeding their teachings or just glibly repeating land acknowledgments? The cruise ship business model is an ecological and societal wrecking ball. In order to restore balance, each one of us needs to make a courageous stand for sustainable and compassionate stewardship of our world. But first, we need to fully acknowledge the gravity of the problem, and that requires listening to voices outside the echo chamber of capitalism, which puts profits above all else. Seattle Cruise Control suggests that at your upcoming cruise study session, you include experts on the economic, social, and ecological impacts of cruise, people like Dr. Martha Honey and Dr. Ross Klein, who could widen your perspectives and allow for a diversity of voices to be heard. Please stop greenwashing cruise, which is an unsustainable business model for our region and the world. Countless lives and the web of life itself are at stake, and we are running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Vost. Next speaker.
My name is Stacey Oaks. Last year, Commissioner Fellman said, quote, "Clearly there is an insatiable appetite for cruise. We didn't create it, it exists. Our job is to minimize those costs while maximizing the benefits," unquote. This statement serves to distance the Port of Seattle from the responsibility of the impacts and the damage caused by the cruise industry while trying to justify profiting from the carnage. But how can the Port of Seattle pretend like it's not actively stoking the fire of this insatiable appetite after recently approving international cruise advertisements to the tune of up to $500,000? The port often attempts to minimize or hide impacts using linguistic gymnastics or limiting the scope of the conversation to just our immediate area. Bring up the customary practice of dumping toxic scrubber exhaust, sewage, and garbage into the waterways. The port counters that the dumping doesn't happen right here. Push back against adding additional sailings of these fossil fuel-intensive ships that burn 30 to 50 gallons of fuel for each mile traveled. The port points to the use of shore power while docking at our pier with the expectation of applause. speak out about the conditions and pay of onboard workers from the countries like the Philippines and India, the response jumps to how many millions the industry claims it brings to our state. We can't just look out for Seattle, for Washington, for the waters on our own horizons. Labor exploitation is unacceptable regardless of the language a worker speaks. The pollution dumped near Victoria, BC affects water quality, our endangered orcas, and the seafood we eat. Greenhouse gases exacerbate the climate crisis for all of us, regardless of where along the itinerary they're burned. How many more deadly heat waves and record-setting wildfires must Washington endure before we actually start transitioning away from the businesses destroying this paradise and the world our children will inherit? It's time to start being honest, take responsibility for all the impacts of our investments, and leave the tunnel vision behind to look beyond our own backyard. I urge you to do a study session focused on identifying the impacts of cruise to our own community and beyond. And I implore you to fill that study session with experts that do not have profit motives connected to the continuation of the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oaks. Next speaker.
Yes, our next speaker is Robin Briggs.
Hi, my name is Robin Briggs, and I live in King County. After the recent IPCC report came out, I saw a headline that read, "Earth on track to be unlivable, see story on A3. All humans will die if we don't change our behavior, but somehow that does not go on page 1 with stories that merit our full attention. It ends up buried in the back pages. As many people are, and as I'm guessing most of you are, I am concerned about the climate, and I don't think we should be ignoring it. Wildfires cause smoke, which is really bad for all of us. But last year, wildfires actually came into the urban core in Portland and people had to evacuate. How long before they come here? We're in the middle of a 1,200-year drought in California where much of our food is grown. We are beginning to experience what is coming if we do nothing. So we have that on the one hand, Earth on track to be unlivable. And on the other hand, we have cruise ship sailings at an all-time high. Cruise ships cause a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And frankly, they are not a necessary activity. We don't need them the way we need clean air, food, concrete, and steel. Why are we having so many sailings, and why would we think that this is good? We need to make choices, cut back or decarbonize. If cruise can't or won't decarbonize, let's have fewer sailings while they figure it out. But growing it as a business, that's not good for the region, and it's not good for the planet either. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Briggs. Next speaker.
Yes, hi. I'm Dr. Heather Price. I'm an atmospheric chemist, and my PhD focused on air pollution, and then my postdoctoral research focused on climate science with the University of Washington's program on climate change, and also with research groups at Harvard. So you probably already know that the latest IPCC report is out. It's not news that we're in a crisis. We're in a fossil-fueled climate crisis, and that port commissioners, you are the leaders that the IPCC report is referring to. You are the leaders who every choice you make, it either helps to perpetuate the current harmful systems that are causing the climate crisis, or you make choices that are in alignment with the science and the urgency of addressing the climate crisis. Your latest move to do advertising worldwide to bring rich people who are responsible for the climate crisis to Seattle, perpetuates the climate crisis. Please don't do that. Please think about every choice that you make, every choice, every decision that you make as a leader. You are either creating the systems that are going to solve this problem, or you're perpetuating the systems that are causing harm around the world. And it's not these rich people who are being hurt first and worst, although we are. 1 in 3 Americans experienced a climate disaster in 2021. Any of us living in the Puget Sound lived through the heat dome event. It was the deadliest weather event in Canada that's ever been recorded, and also for the Pacific Northwest. Hundreds of people died, over 200 people just in BC, and hundreds here in the Pacific Northwest. We're already living with the consequences. Please, please, please think deeply about the choices you make when you're making decisions. Every choice has a climate, touches climate and touches climate justice in particular. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Price.
Good afternoon, members of the Commission. I'm Iris Antman, member of Seattle Cruise Control, who writes to ask the port to take the growing threat of species extinction, including human beings, and environmental devastation by runaway global warming caused primarily by burning fossil fuels seriously. She cites WG3 of the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report from the UN that states, a failure to peak and reduce emissions in the coming decade will put Paris Agreement goals increasingly out of reach. She also notes that port recruiting efforts in the UK and Europe are not responding to a demand, but rather creating one. She asked for a retraction of the contract to expand cruising markets and repurposing of the funds to develop new clean industries and sources of employment. Mary L. Stevensons from Ketchikan, Alaska, writes regarding climate concerns related to cruise through Alaskan waters and compliance with environmental regulations.